Welcome back to the deep dive. We're ripping up the calendar today because that stretch of time, October and November of 2025, it was just a brutal, brutal lesson in digital fragility.
It really
It
was.
was a month defined by failure, and not external attacks, but catastrophic internal operational flaws,
Right.
right at the very heart of the global internet.
That period precisely was a watershed moment. I mean, a true reckoning for infrastructure providers and, more importantly, for every single enterprise that depends on them.
Right.
We're not talking about small glitches here. We are diving into systemic vulnerability across cloud, across financial exchanges, the global digital edge.
Yep.
All of it exposed over a terrifyingly short 4-week span.
And what makes this all so much worse is the backdrop. You have this massive resource-straining AI infrastructure arms race happening at the exact same time.
Perfect storm.
So you have the existing internet crumbling under configuration errors, while simultaneously billions are being poured into building new systems that place this unprecedented, unsustainable strain on our actual foundational utilities.
Our power grids, our water supply.
Exactly.
It really is the perfect storm. So our mission today is a deep dive into the source material that documented this crisis. We really need to extract the crucial, the actionable knowledge from it all.
What went wrong?
What went wrong, why it went wrong, the configuration calamities at AWS and Azure, the very suspicious financial market halt at CME, and this highly controversial AI data center gold rush that is creating real resource scarcity. We have to connect these dots and understand the true cost of third-party risk.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We built the modern internet for hyper-efficiency, right? For speed, for massive scale. But the core question we're answering today is whether in that quest we just utterly neglected the fundamental safety rails.
The mandatory redundancy, the stress testing.
Things we would demand, that we do demand for traditional critical infrastructure like a power plant. Because, the evidence from late 2025, it suggests we built a glass castle.
And the cracks started showing.
Let's start with that first crack. The opening volley of this whole reckoning. The AWS catastrophe on October 20, 2025. The sources we looked at describe this as arguably one of the largest internet outages in history. We're talking over 6.5 million down detector reports. Well over 1,000 major services affected. It was just chaos.
And the chaos was triggered by something seemingly mundane, which is so often the case with these systemic failures. It was a DNS resolution failure.
Right, DNS. It's always DNS.
Always DNS. But this was specific to DynamoDB, Amazon's managed NoSQL database service, and it started in US East 1, Northern Virginia.
The big one.
The big one. But the scale of the collapse, why it went global, that stemmed entirely from architectural decisions made years ago.
Okay, so explain that architectural flaw for us. Why does a DNS error in one database in one single region bring down services globally?
It's the paradox of cloud centralization, especially in what we call the control plane. So while organizations, they do the right thing, they distribute their actual application data across Europe, Asia, other U.S. regions.
For resilience.
Exactly, for resilience. But key control plane services, think of them as the administrative brains of the entire AWS operation. They remain highly centralized. And the most critical example is AWS Identity and Access Management, IAM.
IAM. The thing that checks who you are and what you're allowed to do.
It validates nearly every single operational API request. So if you can't authenticate, you can't function. It's that simple.
So the DNS failure in DynamoDB in Virginia.
It caused IAM to start having resolution problems. So now your application, running happily in Frankfurt or maybe Sydney, it needs to make a simple API call. Maybe to check a security group, retrieve a secret, spin up a new resource.
A totally normal operation.
A totally normal, everyday operation. That request, more often than not, has to touch US East 1 for IAM validation. So if Virginia's IAM control plane is effectively down, your globally distributed services are paralyzed.
So all that geographic redundancy that companies pay for.
It becomes meaningless. The data plane is fine, but the control plane is a centralized single point of failure.
And the global cascade was, from what I remember, almost immediate. The sources paint this picture of total paralysis.
It was immediate and it was brutal. We saw these real-world impacts in minutes. In financial services, you had Vanguard users locked out of their retirement accounts.
Oh, wow.
Robinhood traders couldn't execute trades. PayPal transactions were just failing midstream. Education just ground to a halt. Canvas, Pearson, College Board. These are services essential for midterms, for daily instruction globally. They just went dark.
I remember the reports about retail, too. It's amazing how heavily these companies rely on cloud services just for the most basic transactions.
They absolutely do. Communication platforms, your Teams, your Slack, your Zoom, they all had functionality impaired because their back-end configuration or their authentication relied on some AWS service somewhere.
So even if they're not fully on AWS, a little piece of it is.
A little pieces. And yes, retail chaos was rampant. I mean, think about Starbucks, the McDonald's app,
Right.
just gone. Toast POS systems in thousands of restaurants were forced into completely manual pen and paper operations.
In 2025.
In 2025. They couldn't process payments or track inventory. The economic toll was immediate and staggering. The sources estimate the damages exceeded $75 million
Per hour.
for AWS customers. That figure, I mean, that should be treated as a warning siren across every boardroom in the world. It reminds you what a true single point of failure actually costs.
Okay, so the industry is still reeling from this. And then just 9 days later, before anyone could even fully process the postmortem from AWS, we get the Azure Front Door incident.
Yeah.
October 29th.
The double punch.
It was a double punch that just underscored the systemic nature of the problem because the circumstances were, well, they were eerily similar.
The similarity is exactly why this period is so alarming. Microsoft experienced a global service disruption caused, and you can't make this up, by an inadvertent configuration change.
Human error, again.
Human error, applied to Azure Front Door, or AFD. And you really need to understand what AFD is. It's not just a basic content delivery network. It is Microsoft's globally distributed Layer 7 edge fabric. It's the front door, the authentication and routing gateway to the entire Microsoft cloud universe.
So this was another critical control plane error, just like AWS, but this time it was focused on the network edge.
Exactly. This one bad configuration change propagated across Microsoft's global network of edge points of presence, and it instantly affected every single Azure region worldwide. The blast radius was everything AFD sits in front of.
Basically everything.
Essentially, yes. The critical entry point for all things Microsoft. Microsoft Entra ID for authentication, the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, Teams, Xbox Live, and then thousands of third-party services that sit behind Azure, Costco, Capital One, major airlines like Alaska Airlines.
So just to be clear, even if the actual back-end servers hosting Microsoft Teams were perfectly healthy,
Which they were.
the error in Front Door meant the request couldn't get authenticated or routed correctly. So healthy services became instantly unreachable.
A completely healthy back-end service is useless if the front door is jammed. And what's more, in a profoundly ironic twist, while administrators were scrambling to understand the scope of the outage,
The status page went down.
Microsoft's official status pages, including status.cloud.microsoft, were intermittently offline during the early stages of the incident. It just compounded the frustration. You have administrators who rely on those pages for visibility, and they were forced to get their updates from, unverified social media reports.
This technical detail, the fact that both of these massive outages share configuration errors or DNS problems as the root cause, that is the crucial nugget linking these two giants.
It is.
It proves that regardless of their multi-billion-dollar scale or their sophistication, both AWS and Azure are fundamentally vulnerable to the exact same class of human-initiated errors.
The industry mantra for years used to be, the cloud providers handle resilience better than you can. And the events of October 2025 really prove that while their scale is unmatched, their architecture contains these centralized single points of failure in the control plane, at the edge fabric, and it leads to correlated risk.
So that concentration of risk means when one person makes one mistake.
The economic fallout is catastrophic. And this is why having granular, unbiased data on these failures is just non-negotiable if you want to build genuine resilience.
You can't just read the headlines.
No, you have to understand the precise timelines, the forensic root causes. It's the only way forward. And for those who need that level of detail, those detailed postmortems and threat intelligence on these types of catastrophic failures, we highly recommend the deep analysis available at www.breached.company. Their work helps security leaders move beyond just the news cycle to real, actionable insights.
So we've covered the core cloud providers. Now let's move from the central cloud to the internet's critical edge, because then we have the Cloudflare collapse on November 18, 2025, the third major incident in less than a month.
Right.
And Cloudflare protects and accelerates something like 20% of the entire web. They had their own configuration nightmare.
This time, the root cause was a configuration file that, it automatically grew beyond its expected size, and that triggered a latent bug in their bot mitigation service.
A bug that was just sitting there waiting.
Just sitting there. It started as a routine software deployment in a single data center, again in Virginia. But because of Cloudflare's global routing prominence, that one single bug quickly rippled into a worldwide service disruption.
And the economic loss here was, again, just staggering. It really reinforces this idea that any single point of failure in this architecture is a multi-billion-dollar liability.
It was. I mean, estimates suggest the outage affected nearly 20% of the web. The total cost could have been as high as $60 billion.
$60 billion.
Based on estimates from $5 to $15 billion per hour of disruption. But, the money is abstract. The real-world consequences, that's what reveals the true depth of our reliance on these concentrated services.
Okay, so give us some examples of those real-world consequences.
Well, think about critical public safety and infrastructure. During the outage, McDonald's self-service kiosks went dark. Annoying, but not critical.
Right.
But far more critically, the Personnel Access Data System, PADIS, which is used for background checks at U.S. commercial nuclear facilities, went unavailable.
Wow.
So security and access at highly sensitive sites were compromised, or they had to switch instantly to backup manual protocols, assuming they had them and they were tested.
And what about smaller things?
We also saw smaller but, vital services fail. Daycare check-in apps across the country had to revert to pen and paper processes. The key takeaway here is what you could call the CDN paradox. These services are necessary. You need them for performance and security, for DDoS protection, but relying on them creates these new systemic concentration risks where one bad deployment can take out critical functions globally.
So the pattern of configuration errors causing these global outages is painfully clear by now.
Yeah.
But then, on November 28th, we had the CME cooling failure.
Right.
And this pulls us out of the digital realm of software configuration and into what was allegedly a physical infrastructure failure in the financial sector. This is a crucial transition point in the story.
It is, because it connects concentration risk from the digital web edge to a physical financial choke point. The CME Group, the world's largest derivatives exchange, experienced a massive outage, over 10 hours.
And that halted everything.
Completely halted trading across contracts worth $26.3 trillion in daily volume. Everything from commodities and treasuries to currencies. The official reason they gave was a cooling system failure at their Cyrosone CHI-1 data center in Aurora, Illinois.
And the timing of this failure, particularly within the financial markets, raised massive red flags in the sources we reviewed.
It was almost impossibly coincidental. I mean, the halt occurred precisely as silver futures were approaching this massive, multi-decade breakout level, hovering around $54 an ounce.
And this was during a holiday period.
A thin liquidity period leading up to the holiday, which means a small push could have caused an explosive price movement. At the same time, banks borrowed a colossal $24.4 billion from the Federal Reserve's standing repo facility that very morning.
So you have a strange liquidity injection.
A very unusual liquidity injection, coinciding exactly with the moment the world's most critical derivatives exchange goes completely offline. Professional traders were, to put it mildly, immediately suspicious.
So why are the specifics of a cooling failure technically implausible? That sounds like a standard disaster recovery issue, doesn't it?
It should have been, but the sources specializing in data center engineering, they detail the implausibility of it. The Cyrosone facility was a highly specified building. It had 8 independent chillers.
So, tons of redundancy.
N+1 or even N+2 redundancy. It should have made a total failure just about impossible. But more critically, the overnight weather in Aurora, Illinois was well into the sub-30s Fahrenheit.
Which is cold.
Very cold. And those temperatures are ideal for engaging the data center's free cooling systems, which use outside air to cool the facility without even relying on the primary chillers.
So for all 3 systems to fail.
The redundant chillers, the backup systems, and the natural free cooling. For all of them to fail simultaneously, it suggests either a fundamental architectural flaw that went undetected for years, or, as some of the sources speculated, something far more coordinated than a simple chiller malfunction.
And there were strange reports from the trading floor, too.
There were. The order book for silver futures, for example, had allegedly cleared all sell orders just moments before the halt, which would have set up a massive price gap once trading finally resumed.
And this brings us right back to third-party risk.
Yeah.
Because CME didn't even own this critical piece of infrastructure anymore.
Exactly. This is a textbook case study example of outsourcing control while retaining 100% the risk. CME sold the facility in 2016. It was a sale-leaseback deal.
To save money.
Right. They lost direct operational control, but they retained 90% of global derivatives pricing dependency on that single specific site and its vendor, Cyrosone. And the sources confirm that Cyrosone had a documented history of infrastructure issues at that precise location.
So this wasn't their first problem.
Not at all. There was a transformer failure in April of 2025 and emergency repairs in August of 2025.
So CME makes this massive $130 million bet on cost optimization by shedding the real estate.
But that decision compromised fundamental resilience standards, which then paralyzed global financial markets when their third-party vendor failed.
It shows that resilience cannot be sold off.
No. Traditional contracts, your SLAs, they clearly failed to enforce the level of operational control and resilience testing required for a system that underpins the entire global economy. This shift in physical infrastructure risk management is as critical a lesson from November 2025 as the software configuration failures were in October. The concentration risk exists whether you're dealing with lines of code or cooling pipes.
Okay, so we've established the fragility of the existing system. Now we have to layer on the resource consumption of the AI gold rush, which was happening simultaneously all through 2025.
Right.
This isn't just a technical build-out. This is a fundamental stressor on the utilities that both the internet and, human communities rely on.
The scale of this investment is truly mind-boggling, and it's why utilities worldwide are just struggling to plan for the near future. Total AI infrastructure investment is projected to exceed $2 trillion by 2029. We're talking about colossal, multi-billion-dollar projects.
Okay, give us some of those colossal numbers.
Look at the commitment figures we're seeing. You have the Stargate venture, that's OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle, with $500 billion committed and a 10-gigawatt power consumption target.
10 gigawatts.
Meta Platforms is aiming even bigger, over $600 billion committed through 2028. They're planning Hyperion, a 5-gigawatt data center in Louisiana, and Microsoft alone, just for fiscal year 2025, committed $80 billion to build out its AI data center capacity.
This is an infrastructural arms race.
Unlike any we've ever seen, and this translates directly into an escalating electricity crisis. Our sources paint a very bleak picture of grid stability.
They really do.
AI data centers are projected to consume 12% of total U.S. electricity consumption by 2030. To give you some perspective, that is triple the current share, and it vastly exceeds the current consumption projections from electric utilities globally.
Put that in human terms.
A typical large AI data center uses the equivalent power of 100,000 households. This requires massive, urgent, and very expensive grid expansion. And those infrastructure costs, they're inevitably passed on to ordinary ratepayers.
So we're essentially subsidizing trillion-dollar tech companies' AI ambitions.
That's the argument, yes. But power is only half the story. The water crisis, especially in drought-prone regions, is perhaps even more critical given the massive amounts of water needed for cooling these dense GPU clusters.
Water consumption is the ghost in the machine.
It really is. A single large AI data center can consume up to 5 million gallons of water every day. That's the same amount as a town of 50,000 people.
For one data center.
For one data center. And this demand is accelerating. Globally, this unsustainable demand is projected to increase 11-fold by 2028. This isn't theoretical. This is actively exacerbating drought conditions in arid regions where these facilities are strategically sited for cheap land and fast-track permits. New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Texas.
And the sources we reviewed included a deeply disturbing case study that brings the environmental and community cost of this resource drain into really sharp focus. The Colossus supercomputer built by xAI in Memphis.
The xAI Colossus controversy in Memphis is a critical lens through which to view this whole AI gold rush. xAI chose to build this colossal supercomputer in Boxtown. It's a predominantly black, lower-income neighborhood.
And it already has pollution problems.
It's already classified as an environmental justice area. It's historically burdened by pollution, hosting 22 of Tennessee's 30 largest industrial polluters. And xAI just introduced another massive burden.
And from the reporting, xAI immediately started making unsustainable demands on the grid and, critically, started bypassing established protocols to meet its deadlines.
They did. They requested scaling capacity to 1.1 gigawatts. If that's fully utilized, it could consume 40% of Memphis's entire power grid.
40%. For one facility.
For one facility. And to achieve rapid deployment, to bridge the gap until permanent power infrastructure was ready, xAI deployed between 33 and 59 portable natural gas turbines. And crucially, they operated these highly polluting turbines without the proper permits.
And the resulting pollution was just staggering, even compared to the established industrial baseline in that area.
It was a pollution disaster. Operating these unpermitted turbines resulted in over 2,000 tons of smog-forming nitrogen oxide, or NOx, emissions. To put that in devastating context, that is more NOx emissions than the area's 4 largest industrial polluters combined,
Including the oil refinery.
including the massive Valero refinery. And for a community that already suffers the highest childhood asthma hospitalization rates in the state, the consequences were immediate.
What were residents reporting?
Residents reported spiking respiratory issues, severe asthma attacks, all correlating precisely with when the turbines were operating. Community leaders rightly and fiercely labeled this environmental racism and policy violence.
The lack of due process here, the lack of regulatory oversight, it suggests that speed and AI dominance are being prioritized over public health and existing law.
That is the core conflict. The regulatory context is just struggling to catch up, and in some cases, the government is actively making it easier for these projects to move forward quickly.
You're talking about the Genesis mission.
The sources point to the Trump administration pushing the Genesis mission executive order to actively deregulate and fast-track this infrastructure build-out. They're using loopholes like NEPA categorical exclusions exemptions in the National Environmental Policy Act to bypass detailed environmental reviews.
And the stated goal is?
The stated priority is AI dominance and national security, but the practical effect is prioritizing rapid deployment over local community input and environmental safeguards.
And we are seeing resistance rise everywhere these projects land, not just in Memphis.
Absolutely. Community resistance is intensifying island-wide. In Louisiana against Meta's Hyperion, in New Mexico across Texas, people are fighting back against these massive tax breaks giving to trillion-dollar companies and the resource depletion, especially when they're worried about their own water supply and their spiking utility bills, while these data centers get special treatment.
It's a flashpoint.
It's becoming a critical social and political flashpoint. The question of who pays the price for this massive expansion is front and center.
And navigating this rapidly changing regulatory environment, especially around ESG reporting and new compliance obligations for water and energy consumption, is now mandatory for any large organization.
You can't ignore it.
For those who need to map and navigate these shifting state and federal standards, specialized compliance resources are essential. We recommend leveraging the insights available at www.compliancehub.wiki. They track these resource consumption regulations and compliance shifts rigorously.
So we've spent most of this deep dive looking at the failures. The hyperscalers, the financial markets, the internet edge, the resource strain of AI. Let's shift now to the essential lesson from these 2025 disasters.
Okay.
The fundamental flaw of relying on the myth of human error.
It's the easiest scapegoat, right?
It is. Uptime Institute data shows that 75% of data center outages involve human error, but that number is profoundly misleading. As our sources emphasize, blaming the human is blaming the last domino to fall.
The failure always lies earlier in the process.
Far earlier, in management and architecture and access controls.
And we can see this so clearly in some historical case studies that really echo the 2025 configuration errors, specifically the Delta and British Airways data center disasters.
Right. Take the Delta outage in 2016. Grounded thousands of flights, cost $150 million. The immediate cause was a maintenance test fire in an automatic transfer switch.
But that wasn't the real cause.
The real cause was architectural. Out of 7,000 components in that facility, 300 were never wired to backup power. It was a design flaw that persisted for years, completely undetected, because management prioritized cost-cutting and never invested in comprehensive full-power load testing.
So the failure wasn't the technician who ran the test.
It was the managerial culture that allowed that critical flaw to exist in the first place.
And similarly, the British Airways incident in 2017, another £150 million loss.
Right.
That was famously blamed on a contractor who accidentally unplugged a power supply.
And then, critically, overrode the UPS, the uninterruptible power supply, bypassing the backup generators entirely. Both the Delta and BA failures, they demonstrate that these were not simple, isolated mistakes.
No.
They were the inevitable consequence of a system designed without defense in depth, where cost optimization stripped away the layers of redundancy that should have isolated the human mistake. If a single individual's action, regardless of their clearance level, can destroy your entire operation.
The failure isn't the technician.
It's the architecture, the access controls, and the training procedures.
So the central unifying theme across all of 2025's failures, AWS, Azure, Cloudflare, CME's reliance on CISO, is that third-party risk is now simply synonymous with systemic risk.
Absolutely. The recent highly publicized incidents, CDK Global, whose ransomware attack froze 15,000 auto dealerships.
Unbelievable.
CrowdStrike, whose update crashed 8.5 million systems across major enterprises. PowerSchool, whose breach exposed 62 million student records. They all prove the same fact. You can outsource a critical function, but you cannot outsource the resulting risk.
And the sources confirm that traditional vendor risk management, VRM, is it's failing miserably because it relies on checkboxes.
Traditional VRM, relying on these static questionnaires, it just provides a false audit-based sense of security. It fails on two crucial fronts. First, it fails to map your nested dependencies.
It's the chain of services.
The chain of services that your cloud provider or your CDN relies on. If your CDN uses a specific DNS provider and that DNS provider fails, you fail. Simple as that. Second, it fails to assess the blast radius dynamically.
Like with PowerSchool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
PowerSchool, for example, passed security assessments despite lacking basic multi-factor authentication on its customer support portal. A questionnaire is useless if it doesn't reveal the actual real-time security posture and vulnerability chain.
So building true resilience requires moving far beyond those static assessments.
But continuous risk monitoring and real-time dependency mapping.
And for CISOs who need those modern tools and frameworks to assess vendor security posture, map that supply chain risk, and implement mature incident response plans that actually account for these catastrophic third-party failures.
That's where you need specialized resources.
We'd point you to resources like www.cisomarketplace.com. They provide the tools necessary to treat your vendor's infrastructure as an extension of your own risk domain.
So, given this pattern of systemic failures in 2025, let's turn this into 5 mandatory actionable lessons for you, the listener. For the enterprise security and IT leaders who need to survive the next configuration blunder.
Okay, number 1. Mandatory multipath resilience. What does that look like practically?
It means if your primary management path, the Azure portal, the AWS web console goes down, you must have an alternative out-of-band management channel that's physically or logically segregated.
Like the command line.
Direct CLI access, PowerShell, secure tunnels that bypass the compromised web consoles. If the control plane fails, you need a different way to take emergency action.
Okay. Second, you have to explicitly test vendor failure scenarios.
This is the critical step most enterprises skip. Your disaster recovery plan must assume your cloud provider, your CDN, or your core identity provider is completely offline for 12 hours.
Not degraded, offline.
Completely offline. Have you actually simulated that scenario? Can you fail over to a degraded mode? If you haven't tested your ability to operate through a complete AWS US East 1 failure, your DR plan is a theoretical document, not an operational readiness strategy.
Third, understand your dependency map deeply.
Map your entire dependency chain, including their nested vendors. Identify exactly where your single points of failure remain. As we saw with both hyperscalers, identity and authentication services are often the most centralized and critical choke points.
So you need redundant ways to log in.
You need redundancy in how your users authenticate. That often means running authentication services both on-premise and in the cloud or across multiple segregated cloud providers.
Number 4, comprehensive independent monitoring.
Right. Never ever rely solely on the provider's health dashboards. As Microsoft proved, they can fail during the incident itself, leaving you blind when you need visibility most.
So use a third party.
Implement third-party synthetic monitoring tools that report on the status of your vendor services from an external vantage point across multiple geographic locations. If the outside world can't reach your vendor services, you need to know immediately, regardless of what their own status page says.
And finally, number 5, challenge the assumptions and challenge the vendor SLAs.
Demand radical transparency from your vendors on their configuration change management processes. Push for specific, fast rollback commitments in your service level agreements. If they can't commit to rolling back a faulty configuration change in under an hour, or if they resist proving their architectural redundancy,
then the risk is too high.
The risk they pose to your business is fundamentally unacceptable. The pattern is undeniable. AWS, Azure, Cloudflare, 3 major infrastructure providers failed within 30 days due to the same class of configuration errors. The cost of implementing multi-cloud strategies and resilience today is far, far less than the estimated $75 million per hour cost of the next catastrophic vendor outage.
You cannot wait for the next incident. You need to implement these defenses right now.
You do.
This deep dive into the infrastructure reckoning of 2025 has provided a really stark look at the fragility underpinning global digital services. The centralization that gave us this massive scale and efficiency also created catastrophic, correlated, single points of failure.
It did.
The back-to-back failures of October and November proved that our most critical systems, from finance to healthcare to education, are just precariously balanced on foundations that are far less robust than we were led to believe.
And the industry and government must change. We have to demand a regulatory shift where cloud platforms and major CDNs are classified and held to the standards of critical infrastructure. That means mandatory stress testing, enforced redundancy standards, independent oversight.
But you can't wait for that.
No. While we wait for regulators to catch up, every enterprise must treat its cloud and digital dependencies like the critical utilities they are. You have to map them, monitor them, redundancy them, and plan for them to fail completely.
We want to leave you with one final, provocative question that connects the technical failures of the cloud to the human cost of this massive AI arms race. When communities of color bear the brunt of air pollution, water depletion, and infrastructure strain, as we saw so vividly in Boxtown, while tech billionaires rack up trillions in market cap to train opaque AI models, is that truly justifiable economic development, or is it a systemic failure of policy and equity?
It's a tough question.
Do we accept this profound and obvious fragility as the price of technological innovation? Or do we finally demand better safeguards for both our global economy and our communities?
Thank you for joining us for this extensive deep dive into the infrastructure crisis. For the resources, frameworks, and actionable insights mentioned today, visit our sponsors. www.cisomarketplace.com for modern tools to assess and manage vendor risk, www.breach.company for detailed incident analysis and threat intelligence, and www.compliancehub.wiki for regulatory and ESG guidance on resource consumption.
Until next time, keep digging.